the touch of your lips, dear, but much more for the touch of your whips, dear. You can raise welts like nobody else as we dance to the masochism tango.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Hourgasm. This is the podcast where we talk about decolonizing sexuality and gender. I am Lindsay G. I use she, her, or they, them pronouns. And unfortunately, my co-host Lenny is not able to join us this week for this episode because she is very busy doing hot girl shit, as I'm sure you're all aware. And this week, I'm so excited to be joined by Gaia Morrissette. Gaia, can you tell us your pronouns and a little bit about you?
I am she and her. I am a holistic sexual wellness specialist, a BDSM expert, a trauma recovery specialist, and a high priestess of divine sexual magic and elemental magics.
Oh, amazing. That is a great list of titles. Oh my God. So this week, we are going to talk about the cult of marriage, which is something that Gaia has been experimenting with. But before we dive into that huge and awesome topic, I have a little disclaimer to read. In this podcast, we use the heteronormative terms of the gender binary, men and women, under the understanding that there are agender, androgynous, bigender, pangender, and gender fluid norms that exist outside of cis normativity. While we tend to use male and female as shorthand, this is not meant to undermine the very serious role of colonization and violence against the two-spirit and non-conforming individuals. Even more so, this is not meant to obscure the reality that two-spirit and non-conforming people are the most likely to experience sexual violence, as we have mentioned in earlier episodes. We do not believe in the gender binary without fluidity, which is a Euro-Western construct that forced a strict gender division on our societies, which itself is a form of violence. So, with that out of the way, it is time for us to talk about the cult of marriage with Gaia Morrissette. So Gaia, okay. I know that you are conducting an experiment. In marriage is how I understand it. Can you tell us a little bit about what this experiment is and how it came about?
So a little bit of background. I'm ethically non-monogamous, pansexual. I don't follow any of the norms of society. That's kind of
yes.
the role that I play in the world is to kind of break the rules. If there's a rule, I'm kind of like there to break it. However, during this pandemic that we've been in, looking at doing all of my grown-upping stuff of like wills and estates and logistical stuff. Having a conversation with my primary partner, who's a little older than me, and he was like, okay, so like when I die, I want to make sure that you get all this stuff. And so I'm like, okay, well, let's go to the lawyer and see how do we make that happen. And so I went to the lawyer to try to find a loophole around not having to get married, actually, because I didn't want to be legally married. I've never been legally married, and it was not on my to-do list. It was the opposite for me.
Absolutely. Lenny and I are both against marriage also, just so that you know, like you're in good company here on the podcast.
Excellent.
Totally get it.
So I went to the lawyer 3 times to try to find a loophole, and there were no loopholes. The only way to get these things is if I got legally married so that I got marriage privilege.
Wow. Not even like a common law marriage or
well, the problem is that common law, there's certain laws, like there's certain things, privileges that you get for common law, but if so you have to live with your partner. So that's a forced living arrangement. So you still would have to live with your partner for a prolonged period of time before it's even recognized. In the event of death, that there's a lot of things that won't be recognized. The hospital doesn't necessarily recognize that
Mhm.
that is your so family members could veto your common law person. Like there's all these things that could happen, even if you
Okay.
put it in your will that these were your
Huh.
wishes.
Wow.
That could basically happen. Going to the bank would become more complicated versus if we were legally married. It's simple, easy. Here's my little certificate saying that I'm legally married. Okay, I get everything that I want to get, and it's super easy. And so
Huh.
the thing is that if you're not legally married, you don't get those privileges. Then there's also privileges around health benefits and
Right.
medical and death benefits and taxes. And so there's a long list of marriage privilege that you only get if you're married.
Yeah. Wow. That's interesting to hear too, because I guess like little disclaimer here, I am in the United States
And I'm
and
in
Gaia is
Canada.
in Canada. So while like there's a lot of things that are the same, there's a lot of probably smaller things that are not, but it's interesting to hear that Canada is just as hardcore about marriage as America.
So so from that perspective, so we were like, okay, well, like, let's just do that then. Let's just sign the documents, and and then we don't even need to tell anybody. Like, no one needs to know that anything's changing. Like, it's be our secret. So I started talking to people close to me about that I was getting married, and immediately weird shit started to happen. And this is when I didn't know that there was a cult until this started to happen. So first of all, I have a harem of lovers, being ethically non-monogamous.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't think it was going to be an issue, but apparently it is an issue. So I
Oh no.
told my lovers that I was getting married, and they're like, well, then things need to end. And I'm like, what do you mean things need to end? They're like, well,
Huh.
I'm like, what do you mean? I'm still having sex with you and my partner and all the people that's in the harem. Like that's nothing has changed. Like, you can still send me naughty pictures and we can still have sex and it's all good. Like, nothing has changed.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, because I became a married woman, all of a sudden now I was off limits. And
Oh, that's wild.
which was really fascinating. This is when I was like, there's a thing. There's some more things here. And so this is when I started to lean into, I'm going to do an experiment. I'm going to drop into like, what are all the things? What are all the things that people see as married people, and what it means as me as a woman being married, and how do other women interact with me, and how to society interact with me differently. And so I came out of the
Oh my
closet,
God.
and I was like, I put a post on Facebook, and I'm like,
Yeah.
me and so are getting married. We're engaged. And I had like 700 people excited and encouraging and like
Wow.
rooting on for me. He put it on his post on his page. He got like 5 people. And he has people who interact with him all the time, but it wasn't important. Him getting married wasn't a big deal. Me getting married was like the biggest accomplishment I had finally achieved as a woman, because some man picked me to choose to be I'm important enough because some man picked me. And so this is where it leads back to colonization and slavery of women and the oppression of women, and where the origins of marriage come from is this piece around, as a woman, there's 2 things I need to accomplish in order to be valued as a woman: get married and have babies.
Right. Yep.
And so now I've accomplished some incredible things just in this year alone. Like, incredible. like I in the last couple of years, I trained to do an open swim marathon that I accomplished.
Holy crap.
I quit smoking. I've calibrated my digestion tract, like some really like hardcore, like investing energy and time and health. I didn't get that many excitement posts, comments on those posts. I maybe got a quarter of that. And so that's where the data set comes from, of realization that
there's something going on here.
There's something going on here, because me saying I got engaged got way more excitement, and from people who know me really well. It's not like this is the thing, is that there's people who know me really well of how I move in the world, and that married, it's like if I'm getting married, there's a reason, logistical reason why this is happening. It is not from a romanticized love place. That's not how I move in the world. And yet the high-pitched squealing that has happened, like from people who know me really well, they're like, oh my God, and they're like, their voice octave like goes up like 5 octaves, and they're like squealing and they're jumping up and down, and they're like so excited for me, like this is the best thing that's ever happened to me.
This is wild, like, because it's beyond say you were like a straight woman who wore yoga pants and did the whole the thing, followed the script, right? Say you were a totally normcore woman in her mid to late 20s. This type of reaction would be, I mean, maybe still a little gross to me, but like expected. But you are like a full-on counterculture warrior person who has, like you said, lived your life to break rules and to go against this script. And so it's wild that, like you said, people who know you and understand the way that you operate still have that same response to it. Like,
and that's why I started calling it the cult. It's a cult. It's a cult because people don't know why they're doing it. They don't understand why. It doesn't even make sense that you would be excited for me in this squealing, bouncy thing that's happening right now, because it's not the reason why I'm doing it. But even with, and I've even said the words, like this is how deeply it's rooted in the scripting, that I've said, listen, I'm getting married to gain marriage privilege for the legal ramifications of that. And still, oh my God, I'm so excited for you. You guys are going to be so happy. Like in the next breath, after I just said, this is not about this blissful thing. We're not celebrating my relationship. That's a completely different conversation.
Right. Well, the weird thing about that too is like, if somebody says you're going to be so happy, the implication is that you're not happy yet.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, because
how could you be happy if you're not married?
but the piece underneath that. So I think the piece, and we can get into this a little bit later, of like where all of these pieces come from. But the next phase. So I want to talk about the next weird thing.
Stage B.
Yeah, the next stage is, so I've announced I'm engaged. There's all the weirdness about being engaged. And then people start obsessing, in particular women start obsessing about my wedding. So now it's like, I have to be happy about getting married and I must be so excited about the wedding day. And what am I going to do on the wedding day? And what am I wearing on the wedding day? And what have I decided? And where's my hair happening and all this stuff? And I'm like, so people are like, you must be so excited. And I would say, this is what I would say. No, I'm not excited. I'm kind of annoyed that I have to jump through all these hoops in the first place. And we're just going to City Hall to sign the paperwork.
Do people get deflated by this? Does their excitement...
They get angry. They get angry. They're like, you must be excited. You have to be excited, but you got to find something exciting about this. Like you're starting your life, with this person, and you're not excited about this. And why? And there's got to be. And I'm like, we're in the middle of a pandemic, so I don't even have people coming to the wedding,
Right.
because we're going to City Hall. And I said, and at some point, so this is the only way I could get. This is conversations with people who know me. This is conversations with my nail tech. This is conversations with strangers. I'm like, the only way I could get them to stop hounding me is to say, once the pandemic's over, I'm going to have another celebration to celebrate my relationship at the nudist resort. I'm going to have a naked wedding.
Right. So there.
So there you go. And then they would shut up. But if they didn't say that, they wouldn't. They would keep at me. Like there was no possibility of me not being excited. I couldn't have any feelings other than excitement. And they were going to make that excitement happen, or I wasn't getting to end the conversation or leave.
That's wild. Like, why? What?
I know why.
Tell me.
So this is my theory, right? I'm still gathering data. Like this is, I got married in February. So like, we're still gathering data. But I suspect what it is that as women, let's go back in time, where as women, we only had 3 options. We were a prostitute, we got married, or we joined some religious convent of some sort.
Right. Yeah. It's specifically European history.
History, right?
Okay. Gotcha.
So those were your 3 options for women to have any kind of to survive.
Right. Yes. Agreed.
You couldn't be single.
Yeah.
You got lynched or killed or witch burning, depending on what era and depending on what part of history we're talking about. You being a single woman that owned property was not acceptable.
Yeah. It's hardly even possible.
Yes. So you had those 3 options: marriage, prostitution, or join religion.
Right. So you either make yourself give yourself some dignity by either becoming a nun or getting married, or throw the dignity part out completely so that nobody will want to marry you.
Yes, but
right. And if you become a nun, you still get to get married to Jesus.
Yes, you still get to get married to God. Yeah.
So 2/3 marriage, 1/3 making yourself unmarriable. Okay.
Exactly. Unmarriable, but still, they're still trying to marry you off. Like there's still the hope that somebody will marry you yet.
Right. Will come along and save you from your
come along and save you from your life but you still have to use your vagina in order to survive.
Yeah.
So
and in all 3 of these situations, you must be saved by someone.
Yes.
Either it's the church / Jesus, or it's your husband, or someone who will come and, take you out of this life of misery that you're clearly living if you're a prostitute.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
All right. So marriage is just back then, and for many hundreds of years, and for some people today, is still a form of slavery, because you are not your own individual person. Even things like, let's take the rituals of marriage. So your father walks you down the aisle to pass on that you're no longer his problem, to pass on to the husband that now you take her.
I thought you were going to say property, and then you said problem. It was even better.
Yeah. And now you pay for her. So there's still the dowry was part of it, how many chickens you got, like all those things. So again, she is not an active participant. She has no choice. And her value as a woman is how well she marries depends on what status the family, what you're bringing to the family.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's it, like that's her value. That's why she's not allowed to be sexual. That's why she needs to be a virgin. That's why she needs to, you got to get a good price for her.
Right, exactly.
And
Yeah, it's like taking a cow to the market.
It's taking a cow to the market. That's all it was.
Yeah.
Now, so let's fast forward. What better way to control women than to force them into the slavery of marriage, but to get them on board? And the best
Right.
way to get them on board is to give them one day of their lives where they get to be in charge. They get to
Right.
control the narrative. They get to have this dream day.
Yeah.
So by giving women the wedding day, they basically, what happened is got women on board with getting married because you get this one magical day of your life.
Right. Right. And so, oh my God, so much of our culture, of women's culture in the westernized world is so based on the wedding day. Like Lenny and I had an episode a little while ago where we talked about gender roles in Disney films.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we kept coming back to was how frustrating it is, and it was for me as a child, to see like the entire movie where we get to know and love this character, and she's like this feisty, plucky woman, and the whole movie culminates with her getting married, and then it ends.
Yes.
And I was always like, well, but then what? Like, they lived happily ever after doesn't really feel like much of an ending to me. Like, what does she do next? But it doesn't matter because the wedding is the culmination, like the peak of her life.
That's
and
it.
that just, it's so sad.
That's exactly it. And it's the best brainwashing that there is, because women are struggling to get to the peak of their life, which is the wedding day. And then after that, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter what her life is like. It doesn't really, that's why we don't see movies about it. It's not important. It's not important what her day-to-day life looks like. It's not important how they co-parent with each other. It's not important how they manage the bills. It's not important. Her opinion and her life is now irrelevant.
Yeah, except obviously when she bears children, then she becomes the mom, and then her main role in life is to be the mom, which is what we see depicted everywhere all the time. Like that, once you're above a certain age, which seems to keep like creeping younger and younger, by the way, in pop culture, like once you pass that age, you're now a mom. Like if you are, I have a few friends who are actors, and basically once they passed 30 years old, no matter how young they appeared, they were getting mom roles only. And the same goes for people I know in the porn industry. Like, depending on your looks and whether you've decided on getting implants, once you pass a certain threshold, you are now a MILF. Whether you've ever had a child or not, you are now forever a MILF.
Yeah.
And again, that age keeps creeping downward from everything I hear.
And that brings us to the next stage of the consummation of the marriage.
Oh. Wait, this is still a thing?
It is. You would be surprised how many texts I got from people saying, have you consummated the marriage yet? Have you gotten how's married sex? Have you consummated the marriage yet? Have you consummated the marriage yet? But people who
do they know you? Like
yes.
Oh my God, that's really weird. Like, I mean, do you get people just randomly texting you like on a Saturday? Like, hey, did you have sex last night? Like,
no.
Tell me everything.
No, but everybody wanted to know whether or not I consummated my marriage.
That is weird.
So then let's go back in history and time. Right, of why it's still prevalent here now, because we don't understand why we care. Why does anybody care whether or not I have sex with the man who I've had sex 1,000 times before this day happened? Right.
And that's pretty common knowledge. It's not like
That's
you
right.
two are pretending like you never got it on.
No, there's podcasts talking all about it. All right. So it's because once the wedding happens and the women have bought into their magical day, you have to get knocked up as fast as possible before she can change her mind.
Right.
So the wedding night was all about, after the wedding, then there was all of this stuff about consummation.
Yeah.
So there people would watch, depending if it was how high up in royalty you were.
Yeah.
There would be a whole audience making sure that you actually consummated the marriage, so that it was, so that the heir, if the heir happens, that it was the actual, there was no hanky panky going on. So
that's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
I think I've seen, like, well, God, I was in high school, so take this with a grain of salt. But we went to Europe for like a school trip, and we went to the palace at Versailles, and there was like the public bedroom for the king and his wife, and then their private separate bedrooms. And the public bedroom had like a viewing area.
Mm-hmm.
Like there were chairs set up.
Yeah.
Fucking, I forgot all about that. Oh my God. Weird. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because again, it's that piece around property and ownership and value, right? And the value of a woman was to give an heir.
Yeah.
Right? She's a breeder. That's it. That's the only purpose. And she got to have the wedding. So what more do you want? You got to have your special day. That's all you get. And now you need to pop out babies. And if you don't pop out babies, then you can be replaced or murdered or, all these things.
Mm-hmm.
And it was totally acceptable to have affairs and all those things, except for her. She could never, that would land her dead.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like, my kind of understanding of especially European like royalty and nobility is that like as a woman, before you were married, your body was constantly under surveillance to make sure that nothing happened, that nobody touched you, so that your purity could be ensured for your wedding night.
Yes.
And then basically between the wedding night and the time that you produced an heir for your husband, which is, by the way, purely a mechanism of keeping the power and wealth of that husband within his own bloodline. It had nothing to do with who you were. Although if you were of high quality breeding stock, that was better, obviously. Yes. But like up until you had produced the heir and the heir had either taken up the power of the family or had reached an age where it was like reasonable that this person would survive to be able to do that, your body was still under constant surveillance, because if something went wrong, you needed to be able to produce another heir, toot sweet.
Yes.
And I feel like the only women in those positions that really got to have any degree of freedom were women who had either already produced an heir that had made it to adulthood and could take over, or women who were like widowed, basically.
Yeah. But then you would be married off again. So the family would marry you off again as a widow to try to get more, because you try to gain more power or get something. Like you weren't allowed to be a widow and independent. Like you were allowed a certain amount of grieving period, and then your family married you off again so that you could, here you go, you can bring more wealth to the family.
Right. That is true. I'm thinking of a few examples now.
Yeah.
Of that happening. So it's like, I think basically if you were widowed and postmenopausal, you could do what you wanted.
Yeah, pretty much. If you like, no one wants to have sex. If you didn't want to have sex, you couldn't have sex anymore, and you couldn't produce an heir, and your husband has died, then you might be able to. And you didn't have any wealth, because if you had wealth, you would be married off so that somebody would want that wealth, because it couldn't be in your female name.
Yeah. Yeah. With very few exceptions. Every now and then I like hear about some awesome woman who like totally broke all those rules. And the reason that we still know about them is because they were so weird at the time.
Yeah.
But okay, so all of this coming back to the consummation of the marriage, like, I understand that that's very much a thing historically that people were really concerned about, but it is very weird to me that people are still concerned about it, because who gives a shit anymore? I mean, are there still like laws on the books where, like, if you can't prove that you consummated the marriage, he can divorce you without having to go through legal stuff? Or
Well, there is with the church, you can get annulment.
oh, right, okay.
So basically, if the marriage isn't consummated, you can go to the Pope, ask for an annulment, and then it's like the marriage never happened.
Huh. Even if you spent all of the money that you had in this world on your perfect wedding.
Yeah, exactly. You could
Too
still
bad
get
it didn't
it.
happen.
Too bad it didn't happen. It's annulled in the eyes of God in the church, Catholic Church. Anyways, so yeah.
So then who are these people who want to know if you consummated your marriage? Who gives a shit?
None of them are Catholic.
Huh.
But
I mean,
that's the piece, though, is that, and because of all this pressure, before all of this pressure and performance about consummating the marriage, I didn't have sex for 2 whole weeks.
she says at the end of a quarantine pandemic, and some people are like, fuck you, guys.
I'm sorry for everybody who hasn't had sex in a really long time because you didn't have a partner at the time. I feel for you. I'm sorry. But I got married and I didn't have sex for 2 whole weeks. And just I couldn't. My body refused. Like, I broke out in a yeast infection. I was my body was like, no, we are not consummating no marriage. Nope, it's not happening. No, I'm not having anybody.
Weird.
You made it weird. It's not sexy. It's not kinky. It's not fun. No, this feels obligatory, and I'm not producing an heir. So it's not happening.
Wow, that's wild. Your body just wasn't into it.
No.
Did you have to coax yourself eventually? Like,
well, yeah, I told my husband that if he ever wanted to have sex with me again, to never mention consummation of the marriage. He was smart. He never mentioned it again. So these are some of the things. And then there's some other interesting things, data collecting, that I've done that's been fascinating as well, that all of a sudden my people are hiring me more. My following has increased. More women trust me because now I'm no longer a threat because I'm off the market as far as they're concerned. This perceived ideas that I'm now trustworthy, more trustworthy. It's incredible, fascinating. And, we could have probably a conversation a year from now, and then I'm sure I'll have collected more data and we can show up and have a conversation about all the other weird things that people are doing because they have no idea why they're doing it. Like, that's what makes it a cult, right? When we don't know why we are doing the things we're doing, behaving, saying, acting, it's because we've been brainwashed, and been brainwashed on an epic proportion from a societal standpoint in North America anyways. Like, I can only talk from a North American perspective, but that's the case.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's completely indoctrination, and it starts so young, like, I'm just thinking about like the ways that we are still, like, as women, people who grew up female know that even if you grow up with like the coolest parents, or like counterculture household, or subversive friend groups or whatever, you are still being constantly messaged that your inherent value lies with how attractive you are to men specifically. Like your toys are makeup and dressing up and dolls that look pretty and baby dolls that you get to mother and household skills, like I go for a walk almost every day through the town that I live in, and along the way there's a house that has some kids toys out front, and the one kids toy that is always set up in the same place is the little like play school kitchen set,
Yeah, yeah.
that a little girl has that because little boys don't play with that, and all of these things about growing up. And then with the Disney films, like, geez,
Oh,
it's all geared toward either attracting a man by looking pretty or showing off your domesticity and what a great wifey you would make or what a great mommy you would make. And that is, although there's always getting to be more and more messaging to young girls that they are worth more than that there are other options, the prevalent messaging is still so focused on marketing yourself as potential wife material.
yes. And and here's something that I've always found really fascinating. I remember going into my dentist's office years ago and having a full-on argument with the dental receptionist because
Okay.
around marital status. I'm like, why do you need to know my marital status? Will my marital
my
status for my teeth, will my teeth change if I'm married? Do married people have different teeth than single people? Like, why do you need to know my marital status? And this was when I remember the first time that I realized that marital status is a check mark on everything you fill out.
Good point. Yeah.
What's your marital status? What's your marital status? Every document, what's your marital status? Every appointment, what's your marital status? And yet, those have no bearing. A lot of those documents have no bearing, doesn't change your interaction.
Right. Good point.
So that just tells you how important and how ingrained it is on a societal level that marriage is valued over single.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, I don't get a whole lot of ads online for stuff that I don't like anymore. I've pretty much trained them to like, my entire like mid-20s to mid-30s was spent trying to train Facebook that I don't give a shit about engagement ring advertisements or wedding planning advertisements. Please stop trying to sell these things to me. And I feel like it finally, once I hit 35, they were like, oh, we give up. She's an old maid. Whatever, spinster. Nobody cares about you, But like, it's so so important to your identity. This decision, although it has no bearing on anything except people who are trying to sell you wedding rings and flower bouquets or whatever things they try to sell you when they want you to get married.
Yeah.
Oh wait, no, now they've stopped selling marital stuff to me so much. Now it's like children's car seats. Because
Yes.
I should have young children by now.
Yes. Yeah.
And actually, that's a good question for you. Have you started getting people pressuring you about when you're going to start having babies yet?
No, but I feel like I've done that, been there, done that because of my age. So I'm like 46, and I had my tubes tied when I was 23.
Wow, congratulations. That's hard to do when you're that young.
I fought really hard, very hard around, I was like badass around that, and we can have another conversation all about the weirdness about that.
Yeah.
And the cult of being a mom and a baby breeder and all of those things. So I've spent a lot of time having very super bizarre random conversations with people who are very angry at me for choosing not to have babies.
Wow.
Complete strangers, like yelling at me. Like, how dare you? How dare you choose to not have children when there's so many people who can't have children and you chose not to?
What? It's not that I've never heard people say things like that, but it still every time confuses me so much. It's like the debate that is constantly going on in the States about student loan debts, right? And because like there's a whole lot of people that want student loan debt to be canceled because it's, you know, effectively crippling generations of people in America. And the one thing that I like always have to hear some older person say in those conversations is, well, I had to pay off my student loans, so you should have to too. And it's like, that doesn't, as far as like logic goes, that is not an argument. That doesn't make sense. It's the same thing with having kids. Like, so there
Well,
are a
I
lot of
think
people who can't, so I have to? That doesn't follow. Sorry.
yeah, and it doesn't follow, but it's again putting your nose up at the value of a woman. Like, I chose to not have a baby, then what's the point of your existence? Right?
Fuck.
Your
Ugh.
existence is here to have a baby, and of course be married to have a baby. Like
Yeah.
that's an important part of that sequence of events. And so this is what I've taken away from deeply. I knew that it existed, but until I decided to get married and do this experiment and be vocal about this experiment, because I find it fascinating. I find it fascinating on all of these like brainwashed people that I know really love and adore me, but yet they can't help themselves in doing these things because of this programming. And I'm always so fascinated on why people do what they do, that this is part of this great experiment. And that we can then have conversations. Like, even this conversation is opening up the possibility for the audience who are listening to be like, did I squeal when my friend told me that they got engaged?
Yeah.
And did I assume that they got engaged because it was this big Hollywood romantic, like, I found the one and my soulmate is completing me? Is like that why I'm so happy for them? Am I happy for them because I'm supposed to be happy for them? Like, what is the reasons that you are behaving the way you are about somebody else's life? Because it's really none of your business. Like, why we're so invested in other people's choices, it's really ridiculous at the end of the day. Like, who I choose to spend time with, not spend time with, what I try to do with my body, not do with my body, like all those things really has no effect on anybody else's life. And yet there's so much, what's the word I'm looking for? There's so much dedication to having these systems in place, and that person is behaving in a certain way, and the anger and the frustration and the uncomfortableness within yourself if somebody isn't following that rule, whether we're talking about marriage or anything, is really an indicator. That's an opportunity for us to look at, why is this so important to me, and where did this brainwashing come from? Because if you weren't brainwashed, you wouldn't actually be responding this way.
Yeah, I am totally 100% certain that there has been at least one instance in my life where someone I know told me that she got engaged and I did the squeal thing. Even though, like, for me, that's not something that's ever been important to me, like whether I ever get married or not. It's just not, I haven't seen it personally as the pinnacle of my life, so I haven't oriented my life in that direction, but I still understand the script that I'm supposed to follow, which is when a woman tells you that she's gotten engaged, you are supposed to do the high-pitched squealing and then grab her hands, do a little like fast foot motion dance thing, hug her, and then ask to see the ring. That's what you're supposed to do. I've seen it done a million times, and I am certain that I have done it with someone, although I not actually recalling any specific instances, but I just know that I did it because it's what you do.
Yeah.
It's the script.
Yeah.
And it's been the script for a long time. Although it's interesting, I don't have a whole lot of research in front of me, but I have been kind of randomly doing a bunch of historical diving recently. for various reasons. And I did learn not so long ago that a lot of the customs that we have in America and Canada, specifically for weddings, came directly from the marriage of Queen Victoria to Prince Albert. And that was in like 1860s, 70s, somewhere around there, I think. They had a very long marriage, so I can't remember where it started. But before that time, weddings were like, you know, the more high status you were, the bigger a party you had for the wedding. But weddings, kind of generally speaking, were not as much of a glamorous affair as they are now. It would, for most people who weren't super high class, like upper nobility people, it would be like a relatively modest affair. You'd wear a nice dress. Maybe you'd have a new dress made for it if you could afford it. But it was, you know, pretty much a legal thing. You'd get your families together. You'd have a nice dinner. You'd consummate the marriage. That was kind of it. But the wedding of Queen Victoria was such a huge public event. And she did a bunch of new things, including wearing a white wedding dress, which suddenly became all the rage and has been all the rage ever since. Carrying a bouquet of flowers and having like themed flower arrangements around the whole proceedings. That had not been done before. I think that people used to carry flowers primarily so that if they stank, you wouldn't smell them. And now it's like, for a wedding, you must have giant bouquets. They all must match. They all must match what's on the table afterward and at the reception. Like, that was not a thing. I think even having a cake instead of just a feast with whatever you want to eat became a thing at Victoria and Albert's wedding. And I found all of that really interesting because it was my understanding that all of those things went back way farther, like medieval times, you know, but they're actually relatively recent. But they're now, I think the reason that I thought that they went back so much farther is because they are so completely a part of the script. Like, you cannot have a wedding without these things anymore. And so it just seems like, well, something that is that programmed into our understanding of a wedding must be like ancient. And it's totally not. It's like 150, 60 years old. Before that, people kind of did what they wanted. And just because Queen Victoria did it, now we all have to do it forever and ever. Amen. And it's so weird to me. It's totally arbitrary. It's made up.
Well, it is. But I think that there's certain things that those rituals you could date those rituals back even further, but specifically all at the same time, probably not. So like some of so like, for example, the white dress would represent purity. There's many different wedding rituals throughout the world around white representing purity and the whole thing about being pure before you consummate your marriage, like that would have been, I'm sure you could find reference somewhere historically of other places around that. You know, flowers, well, a lot of pagan ceremonies around hand fasting and like, you know, celebrations, any kind of celebrations, there were flowers in the hair, flowers,
fertility,
fertility, like all that kind of stuff. So the flower piece would have been a part of any celebration, whether they matched. I don't think that was an important part, but the fact that there would definitely have been flowers at a ceremony. And probably the cake piece, I'm sure you could probably find some other like pagan rituals where there was a feeding of your partner.
Right.
Oh,
for sure. Yeah, good point.
Yeah, right. So I think probably those specific things probably weren't put together, but culturally and throughout time, they would have showed up in different rituals that would have just made it so that it would be an accumulation of those things. And maybe even might have even been because of going to other, you know, royalty would have diplomats from all over the world. So
Oh,
there might be some, cultural stuff that was picked up by dignitaries or going to other weddings at other people's places, being like, hey, I really like that ritual. Let's add that to ours.
yeah, that's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that at all. Like how you could just kind of accumulate rituals that are fun. And, I, again, am not a huge proponent of marriage unless it's something that you want to do, but I will say that a wedding is a really good time. Most weddings and receptions, you get cake, you get booze, you get food, you get to dance. It is a good time. And so I could totally see like being a diplomat and being like, hey, that looks like a fun thing to do at a party. I'm gonna bring that back with me.
Exactly. So, yeah. So that's really the gist, I would say, is that for all of us to really look at where are our programming.
Yeah. There's something about the way that you're kind of describing people seeing you differently, like seeing you as more trustworthy or less of a threat now. Although it has no bearing on the way that you're planning on actually living your life. It kind of gives me the feeling that like people are maybe accepting the idea of ethical non-monogamy being an important part of your life as like a phase. Like that, they're super relieved because now that you're married, they think, oh, she got it out of her system.
So here's some funny things about that, actually. So I had people say to me, oh, it's about time you settled down.
Oh, yeah.
And I looked at them, I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm planning on having an orgy on my wedding night. As soon as COVID's clear, that's my plan.
Awesome.
Like, nothing has changed in my world. Right? No, right? And it really, I found really fascinating because this idea that partnership, so we just talked about the rituals and the brainwashing around those rituals. We haven't talked about love, and we haven't talked about that
Right.
component of love. So even the idea of being in partnership as a settling, I find really fascinating, because the reality is that if I chose a partner who allows me to be more of who I am, not
Right.
less of who I am. Right? So settling would be like, my life was fabulous, and then, oh, I got to settle now, and I got to give it all up, and now I'm going to live the rest of my life miserable.
That is very much implied by the idea, yeah.
That's implied. That's what marriage is supposed to be. So like, why would I want to get married if I had to settle? Like, why
would somebody be happy for you?
Exactly. Why are you happy that I'm going to be miserable now?
That's really fucked up when you put it like that. I think though, like, this is me completely talking out of my ass, so I apologize in advance for anyone I'm about to offend. But like, sometimes I do think that there are certain people with certain personality types for whom, like, maybe they're just like tired all the time, and they do want to settle down because it sounds comfortable and easy, and that's legit. If that is what you want out of life, like, I have no judgment for that. That's great. You do you, make yourself as happy as you can. But I think for a lot of other people, myself included, that sounds terrible. I want to keep doing what I want to do, and the idea of settling for something less sounds like the opposite of what I want.
And so here's my counterpoint to that, around that, is that even if wanting to have partnership is an important part of your makeup, of your script, choosing the right partner that you don't give up who you are means that's the partner that you're actually going to spend the rest of your life with. If you choose monogamy and that's the path that you're choosing, then you want to choose somebody that you're really compatible with.
Yeah.
And if you're compatible, it's not a settling. You're not giving anything up. You're completely compatible. So there is no giving anything up.
Yeah.
But if you're giving something up for the idea of stability, it's not, and I did stability in air quotes for everybody who can't see me. There is no stability in not having compatibility.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't exist. As somebody who sees couples and sees couples who are on the verge of divorce all the time, the reason that they are on the verge of divorce is because they were not compatible and they settled because that's what they were told that they needed to do. So settling is basically your death sentence of a relationship.
That is a very, very good point and a very good way of putting it too. I mean, and like getting a divorce, probably for most people, not the end of the world, happens all the time. But I think that key piece of advice of, if you are settling, if you are giving something up, that's an indication of incompatibility. Like there's this video that has been going around the internet recently of an interviewer who is interviewing Eartha Kitt. And he says something about like settling down and compromising for a man in your life. And she just starts laughing in his face. She's like, compromise? What are you talking about? And he was like, well, if you met the right man, don't you think that you would be willing to give up a few things to make that relationship work? And she laughs and she's like, no, why would I give up a part of myself for a man? No, I am looking for a man who loves me as much as I love myself.
Yeah.
And that has really stuck with me. Like just her complete incredulousness that somebody would expect her to compromise for the sake of a relationship. I would like goals. That's how I want to be.
Yeah. I remember when I was fighting to get my tubes tied. And the doctors were like, well, what if you find your dream man? And I started laughing at them and I looked at them and I'm like, okay, so I don't want babies. So my dream man, in order for him to be my dream man, would also not want babies.
Right.
And they were like, but what if you find your dream man and he wants babies? I'm like, and I'm looking at highly educated, this is a doctor standing in front of me and a female doctor at that. So I got a female doctor standing in front of me arguing with me that I might change my mind because I'm going to meet a dream man. And apparently in order for them to be my dream man, I need to want to have babies. Otherwise I can't find my dream man. And I'm like, I got this look on my face like, what is happening right now? Like logically, I don't want babies. My dream man doesn't want babies. So let's take that out of the equation. I don't want any babies. My dream man won't want any babies. Nobody wants any babies.
Good point. And I mean, even if he's like slightly sub-dream man, he certainly would not want you to do something with your body that you fundamentally do not want to do. Like, if somebody demands that you do something with your body that you don't want to do, that is not a good relationship. Get the fuck out.
Yeah, definitely not dream material.
Right.
Definitely.
Nightmare material.
Nightmare material, not dream material. And so, yeah, so these ideas are deeply rooted in our systems around women's value, women's slavery, women's ownership, women's lack of independence, all of these pieces. And we have glorified them, we have romanticized them so that we hide the ugly truths of them and don't even realize that they're ugly truths. because
Yeah.
we've made them into this big, beautiful, romantic gesture that's supposed to be hidden under rainbows and singing birds
Yeah.
and unicorns and white picket fences and all of those pieces. But at the end of the day, real love, unconditional love, and finding partner or partners in your life to have this unconditional love and acceptance means they love you unconditionally, period. Exactly who you are and exactly the way you are. And you love them unconditionally, exactly who they are and exactly the way they are. And finding that is something to celebrate. So that is worth a celebration.
Yeah.
That is worth celebrating, like, wow, I met somebody who really gets me and I really get them. And we are going to continue to support each other's growth of being the best versions of each other. That's
Yes.
worth celebrating.
Absolutely. Yeah. Have a big party for that. By all means, do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if people want to be excited that I met somebody and I have created a fantastic relationship, that it's gone, a lot of work has gone into creating this honest, epic sex, communication, ownership of who we are, pushing each other and calling each other out on when we're being asshats, and looking at each other's shit. If you want to celebrate that with me, I will squeal with you and even do some bum dancing about the accomplishment of co-creating that kind of a relationship.
Yeah. Fuck yeah. Absolutely. And that, like, I love that idea because that is the end result of a lot of fucking work that has been put in. That's the end result. Whereas, like, the way that we are taught to think about marriage is to celebrate the beginning of something that is going to be a lot of work if you are doing it right. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with celebrating the beginning of something, but there's no subsequent celebration built into our culture for, look, we successfully did the thing. Look how awesome that is. Like, I mean, I guess anniversaries are for that, but that's supposed to be celebrated within the couple. There's not like giant, like, we made it to 20 years, let's have a huge party celebrations. And maybe that should be a thing. Like, I would love to go to somebody's 20-year celebration of having done the work. That sounds like a great time.
Yeah. And do they really like each other still after 20 years?
Yeah, it could actually, it could be part celebration, part everybody like examining everything that you're doing. Sleuthing out the truth.
Yeah, like that should be like, it should be like on stage, should be like, okay, let's ask some questions, So how much do you still like each other? What's your sex life like? Do you still have sex with each other?
Right? Not the newlywed game, the like, we've been at this for a while game.
Exactly. Who did you figure out, how did you co-create your cohabitation? How is that going? How's your cohabitation going? What about childbearing? Like all the things. What about money? Like these are the things. Like, did you manage them?
Yeah. How painful was it? How painful is it still?
Exactly. Exactly.
I mean, yeah,
scars.
Mental or physical.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess I want to put like, a tiny bit of a disclaimer on this to say, like, obviously if you're someone who wants to get married and that's like a big deal for you, or if you're someone who did get married and you had an awesome, like totally, normalized Western wedding, like fucking great. That's awesome. Like, nobody here is looking down on you for following a script if you're really into that script. But the main thing is like, examine the script and think about whether it's something that works for you or not before you decide that you're going to completely follow it. It's because it is a script and it was written by people who are not necessarily looking out for what's best for you as an individual. So, take it with a grain of salt, like everything else.
Yeah. All right.
Well, I feel like that was a great conversation.
Yeah. As always, you and I get together, we have great conversations.
Yeah, and while we're at it, can you tell our listeners where they can hear other conversations that you have with me and other people, and anywhere else you'd like to direct them on the internet so that they can find out more about what you do?
So the best place to start is to go visit my website hub, which is the hub of my empire of all the things that I do in the world, is to go to GaiaMorrissette.com. And from there, you can go to all the little subsections of the world, all the different worlds that I navigate and dance and play in. And then for my podcast, I have two podcasts. I host two podcasts. One's called My Orgasmic Life, where Lindsay has been on the show quite frequently. She is my porn expert. So we have
thank you.
awesome conversations, probably every 3 or 4 months around something to do related to porn. And then I also host Tickle.life's podcast with Lindsay's also been on, talking about one of her first, sexy experiences.
Yeah, it's a juicy one.
It's a very juicy topic. So I highly recommend go visiting and listening to those episodes as well. So
yeah, we get on pretty well. And I would love to have you back on, like you said, like a year from now, to kind of talk about like the ongoing marriage experiment and where you found yourself within the cult at that point. So let's make that happen.
All right, let's do it. Let's do it. And again, just like Lindsay's disclaimer, I really want to say that by no means do I have a judgment around any choice that people make for themselves. My experiment that I'm doing is because I find human behavior incredibly intriguing and fascinating, and it's a part of who I am and how I move in the world. And I'm very excited about the historical references of why we do what we do now, based on what happened hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And so that's why I really have leaned into this place around marriage. So I really want the listeners to take away that, like anything, we just need to question it.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what it is. Question it. And then you can decide for yourself consciously, does this work for me? And how do I want to make this work for me if it does work for me? Right. So that we're not we're not moving from this place of automatic movement, of being on autopilot, and then finding out 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now that we regret and have resentment and hate our lives. And we didn't live our lives to the fullest because we never asked the question, do I want to do this? And if so, why? And how do I make this mine?
Yes. Thank you for saying that. Like, because, a lot of the things that we're discussing about, marriage being an enslavement of women is really doesn't have to be true anymore. You can get married and be in a much more egalitarian situation than you could have in, like 1400 in England or whatever. And that's great. By all means, if you want to marry someone and make it your own, that's a new script that you get to write. So, we're not judging anyone here, but we are saying, maybe judge the script a little bit.
Yeah, look at the script and what is the narrative and why, and is that a narrative that you decide? It's about that. I really think it's that piece around conscious decision. I consciously choose this. If I'm going to wear a white dress, it's because I look pretty in a white dress. I'm not wearing a white dress because somebody told me that I had to wear a white dress and that's all I need to do. If, question, why am I doing this? And is it my choice, or is it a choice that somebody else has made for me?
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the awesome things about the world we live in now is that,
Yeah.
for the most part, women do get to make choices now. Sometimes they're made a little bit more under duress than we would like. There's a lot of gray areas there, but we certainly do have a lot more control over what we choose to do with our lives than, the people we were talking about who had to be nuns or married or prostitutes. So
Yeah, and I do want to put a little disclaimer on that piece too, that for some women around the world, we are still facing the same choices.
Yes.
And marriage is also an enslavement for some women, or the only option for survival. And so I think it's really, yes, in North America, in in different demographics and different social economic demographics, some of us have more options and more power and more choices. But there are plenty of women still all over the world, including in North America, that may only have that option to survive.
Right. Yeah, that's really, really important point to make. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. So my heart goes out if that's the only option that you have in your life for survival. And if there's any way that I can support you in in finding a new way out, if that's what you need, then please reach out.
Yeah. Yeah, by all means. We're on the internet. And that story that is the true story for a lot of people is so important. And it's one that, from my place of like privilege, it's hard for me to see and understand. So if that is your story, please reach out. It's important that it gets heard.
Beautiful. Thanks for having me on the show, my dear.
Thank you for coming. This is a great time. And yeah, we'll circle back around in about a year and we'll see what's going on. And whether you had that orgy, and whether you had the giant party and the naked wedding at the nudist resort.
Yeah, so when I end up having the naked wedding at the nudist resort, once COVID is done, you'll be an invite. I'll give you an invite.
Fabulous! Oh my God, that sounds amazing.
So you can be there, and we can maybe even do some live streaming of on-site podcast.
We could live stream feeding each other cake nude. It'll be fantastic. But they won't let us put it on YouTube or Facebook. So be a pay-per-view event.
Not necessarily if we put cake over our boobs. So there's no nipple shots.
Right. It's only the nipple that matters. So
it's only the nipple. So we cover the nipples with cake.
This is a perfect plan.
And we can totally air it.
Awesome. All right. It's on the books. Just tell me the date when you've got it. I'll put it in the planner.
Excellent. Perfect.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening. And we'll be back. I'll be back with Lenny when she's done doing her hot girl shit in a few weeks to talk about something amazing again. Thanks for listening.
Let our love be a flame, not an ember. Say it's me that you want to dismember. Blacken my eye, set fire to my tie as we dance to the masochism tango. At your command, before you here I stand. My heart is in my hand. Ugh. It's here that I must be. My heart entreats. Just hear those savage beats, and go put on your cleats and come and trample me. Your heart is hard as stone or mahogany. That's why I'm in such exquisite agony. My soul is on fire, it's aflame with desire, which is why I perspire when we tango. You caught my nose in your left castanet, love. I can feel the pain yet, love. every time I hear drums. And I envy the rose that you held in your teeth, love, with the thorns underneath, love, sticking into your gums. Your eyes cast a spell that bewitches. The last time I needed 20 stitches to sew up the gash that you made with your lash as we danced to the masochism tango. Bash in my brain and make me scream with pain, then kick me once again and say we'll never part. I know too well I'm underneath your spell, so darling, if you smell something burning, it's my heart. Excuse me. Take your cigarette from its holder and burn your initials in my shoulder. Fracture my spine and swear that you're mine as we dance to the masochism tango.